but I want to go now to Doug Butler, who is a helicopter tour pilot, also worked for Fox News. So, Doug, I want to ask you, doing these tours, what would you anticipate these passengers were told in terms of possible risk and also any training in the event of an emergency?
Well, first of all, there isn't a very long briefing that goes on for the passengers other than an explanation as to how to use life preservers, identification of emergency exits, things like that. I mean, there's thousands of takeoffs and landings of those helicopters over the course of a year, and practically never do you end up having to do an emergency landing into the water, or there's always the possibility of collision, but flights are always conducted in visual conditions. The pilots are always watching out for each other, and they're in radio communication with each other on a common traffic advisory frequency.
And in flying in that area, do you get the sense as a tour pilot that it is monitored properly, since a lot of it is visual and not necessarily, although John was explaining how it's picked up on radar, it does seem like it is somewhat monitored, but is this a very crowded area for these tour helicopters?
Well, yeah, the Manhattan area is very crowded. The area that the crash occurred in was called the Hudson River corridor, and everybody has to operate under visual flight rules on that corridor. The bottom line with it is that the tour operators are always keeping in contact with each other and pointing out other traffic, especially airplane traffic, which might not have the experience that the helicopter pilots have in that area.
Okay, there have in the past been other crashes. I'm looking in my research. June 2007, a sightseeing helicopter crashed into the Hudson just north of the Lincoln Tunnel in New York. It was heading south in the river, as it sounds like this one may have been today. Again, a loud boom, and there were serious injuries. But when you hear that the blade of that helicopter was mangled and the wing of the plane, according to one eyewitness report, had come off, what is your sense in terms of the power of this collision?
Well, it was probably a very high-energy collision. The possibility is also that the helicopter could have been flying on a predetermined route, I should say. Sometimes the airplane traffic that flies the corridor isn't necessarily following the same routes, although there is a set of rules to the road, so to speak. In other words, if you're flying down the river towards the Statue of Liberty, you're supposed to fly on the Jersey side. If you're flying northbound up the Hudson, you're supposed to fly on the New York side. Mm-hmm. Not always is that followed, especially for people that are unfamiliar with the area. The fact that this airplane had come out of Teterboro leads me to believe that maybe they were based there. And if they were, they would be familiar with the area. It's hard to speculate, really.
In this crash that I mentioned from 2007, Liberty Helicopters was the sightseeing tour company as well. And at that time, they were able to deploy yellow emergency floats and make a controlled landing in that particular case. Do those emergency floats on a tour helicopter engage automatically?
No, they don't. Almost all the tour helicopters that fly out over the Hudson have emergency floats, and they're triggered by a trigger on the pilot's control stick called the cyclic. There's a bottle of nitrogen usually mounted underneath the helicopter, and when you pull that trigger, that nitrogen inflates the float. And they'll come out within probably less than 2 seconds. Also, all the passengers are equipped with life preservers.
Do they wear those during the flight? Is that mandatory?
Yeah, they're almost always, attached to them around their waist, and they don't need to do anything more than just pull a tab, and the thing will inflate for them.